David was a greatly loved king of Israel. You could say he was the full package. He could be a mighty man of war, but he also had the heart of a poet. He was very tender toward God. Most of our psalms are by him. But he fell into sin. He caught a glimpse of a woman and he desired her. He had his servants find out who she was. And even though he learned that she was another man's wife, he still acted on his desire. And then in trying to cover up his adultery, he committed murder. David had a friend named Nathan. Nathan told David a story of a rich man who took a lamb that belonged to a nearby family. That lamb was like their family pet, very, very precious to them. Doubly so because the family was poor and had little. And that was a skillful choice in a story. Nathan knew that David as a boy had spent much time around sheep. Nathan knew that story would hook David's emotions. And indeed, David was outraged at the rich man, for taking that poor man's animal. And Nathan said, David, you are that man. And David's eyes were opened, and he turned from his sin. That story is from 2 Samuel chapter 12. What Nathan did for David, was the most loving thing that he could have done. David needed what Nathan did. Without Nathan, David would have gone on unrepentant for we don't know how long. And if too long, David would not have gone down in the pages of the Bible as a man after God's own heart. And his collection of Psalms would have been left unfinished and would not have found its way into the Bible. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 says, make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Holiness, choosing to be separate from sin, to die from it, is our daily, lifelong work as people who want to see the Lord when we step into eternity. A pastor's magazine that I enjoyed always had some cartoons. One had two couples sitting in their living room engaging in some Bible study. And one of the women says, well, I haven't actually died to sin yet, but I did feel kind of faint once. That's a start, but not enough. None who choose to hold on to sin, who don't want to turn from it, can be in heaven where there is no sin. The book of Hebrews is concerned with people who profess Christ but don't ultimately trust and obey him. And so it says, make every effort to be holy. And it calls God's people to be Nathans, helping each other. Hebrews chapter 3, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ if indeed we hold our original conviction firmly to the very end. That was a couple verses from chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 10 has a verse that says, encourage one another, especially as the day of Christ's return is drawing near. That time when it will be very crucial whether or not we are holding on to sin or whether we are letting it go and then can come into heaven where there is no sin. One of the church speakers that I've enjoyed more than any other wrote in one of his books that he has 3 friends who meet with him on Thursday mornings for a couple of hours. It says they talk together, pray together, read the Bible, joke with each other. And he says, whenever my life gets messed up, my friends immediately call an emergency meeting to straighten me out. They say, hey, there's something in your life that is screwed up, that is contrary to the will of God, and we are here to correct you. If they didn't do that for me, I could stray away from God without even realizing I was doing so. Without their correcting ministry, I could mess up my life with ease. Sometimes you and I are like David, or we're like the woman who is only kind of faint at the sight of sin. Like that leader needing his Thursday morning friends. Like that sheep that Jesus talked about in our text in Matthew chapter 18, verse 12. That foolish 100th sheep who thought he could do better away from the shepherd. We go straying from where the Lord, our shepherd, would lead us. And we get lost. And we need someone to come and find us. We need someone to put the next part of our text into practice. And sometimes we are that someone, that Nathan, those small group mates. And we are the ones putting the heart of our text into practice. That next verse has so much wisdom. Matthew 18, verse 15 begins, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. Jesus doesn't say, if they sin, send the pastor to them. Each of us, if we care about the ones straying, we have a responsibility to go to them, say, you have forgotten who you are. You have made a commitment to Jesus, but I see you having your eyes on something else. And you're ignoring, you're even going against Jesus. You've forgotten that you are one who trusts God, who obeys God. God's ways are best. God is much wiser than what we are. We go to them. If they sin against us, as Daryl's translation read, many translations say, if your brother or sister sins against you, But we go to them if, as the NIV, which is the version that I'm reading, if, as that translation says, just if our brother or sister sins. Some of the very good ancient Greek manuscripts just say, if they sin, go to them. And then other manuscripts say, if they sin against us, then we go to them. Basically, it's both. If they sin against you, then we're a little more exercised about it and, interested in getting them to stop. But if they just sin, if we love them, we are very concerned about that, and we want to do something about that. If this is a fellow believer who says they want to follow Jesus, they want to obey God, and you have a relationship close enough where you talk about personal matters, things that are going on centrally in their life, well, then go to them. Don't let them turn away from the living God. Don't let them be caught in sin's deceitfulness. Sin can look so good and end up so destructive. What is our natural tendency when we're aware someone is choosing to not trust, not obey God at some points? I think our natural tendency is to do nothing. We would, Hebrews says, make every effort to live in peace. We would like to just, be nice, keep everything easy, don't rock the boat by confronting anything. We're not sure that we can point out their fault in a way that, they would feel good about it, and therefore that we would feel good about it. So we'd rather just be big-hearted, be nice. But Jesus says, are we followers of Jesus? Are we ones who obey Jesus? Jesus says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. And he wisely continues, just between the two of you. Jesus doesn't say, go tell all your friends, did you hear what so-and-so said? We really should pray for them. But Jesus says, go to that friend, just the two of you. If we care for them, we will go to them. First of all, we'll go to make sure that we got the facts straight. We're thinking that they sinned, but give them a chance to explain. We may have misunderstood what their actions were. And verse 15 ends, if they listen to you, you have won them over. Note, it's not you have won the argument. No, that's not the goal for us to win. The goal is for them to be won back. Now, can you see yourself obeying this instruction from Jesus, our Lord? Maybe you're not sure that you could confront someone about their choices. And maybe you're not even sure that you should. Didn't Jesus also say, don't judge? Well, Jesus's don't judge passage actually is instructive here. Helps us with how to obey Jesus here. After Jesus says, don't judge, he says, this is Matthew 7:3, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? There's no way Jesus could have said that without a twinkle in his eye. You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So it's clear that by do not judge, Jesus is not saying keep out of your brother or sister's business, leave them alone, because that clearly would miss Jesus's concluding point. Then you will see clearly to remove that speck out of your brother's eye. We have the responsibility to help our brother or sister. We just should not do it if we are doing it self-righteously, acting like, we have no sin. Maybe you're still unsure whether or not you could actually pull this off, whether you could win your brother or sister. Well, actually, that's okay if you're not sure. And it's actually even okay, according to Jesus, if it doesn't go well. Jesus just asks us out of care for them to go to them. He doesn't ask us to pull it off perfectly. Indeed, he's aware it won't work out sometimes, because the next verse, he tells us what to do then. Verse 16, but if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Those additional persons are not just there to back you up, to support you. They're there to be there for both of you. Perhaps they'll help you to state your concerns stronger, clearer. Perhaps they'll say, Harold, you're being too harsh here. Perhaps they'll be there to help the appropriate gentleness and love and care to be present. I want to stop here with a question. And this is something that Daryl was sort of anticipating that I might go there. And that is to ask, do you have a relationship with someone or some group that is close enough for this process to happen? If you would suffer some temporary blindness, and it happens to the best of us, even the Apostle Peter had to be rebuked one time, and we saw what happened to David. If you would go through some temporary blindness where you were deceived by sin, would there be someone that you are close enough to that this process that Jesus says needs to happen could take place? All of us need someones who will come and find us when we go astray, who will help hold us accountable to keep our commitment to follow Jesus. I worry about any of us here who do not have a circle like that, a group like that, because then when we stray, we will miss out on the best way God can get through to us. Yeah, God speaks to us through prayer, but when we are sinning, when we are deceived, our prayers are handicapped. Sin messes up our heart, and we tend to hear God saying what we want to hear, and the stuff that we don't want to hear, we block it out. And God speaks to us through the Word, yes, as we read the Bible, but when we are sinning, the Word is handcuffed. We tend to read our rationalizations into the Bible. What we need when we stray is a brother or a sister, a Nathan, who can skillfully, lovingly penetrate our rationalizations, help us see ourselves and our situation and our actions as God sees them. One of the reasons small groups that people like Kirsten are helping to organize. You saw that note in the bulletin, and you heard her several times the last Sundays say something as well. One of the reasons they're so valuable is that they create this opportunity, not so much for it to happen in the middle of the group, but just you have these people that you are regularly meeting with, and you're sharing about your life, and they're getting to know you. I strongly encourage you who do not have relationships somewhere to talk to us. Okay, let's finish this passage. Verse 17. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. In other words, treat them as those outside of God's people. If they don't listen to you and the two or three others, and they don't listen when the whole church is coming with a unified concern, well, then we treat them as a pagan and a tax collector. Those are ones who are outside of God's people. Now, we've been finding Jesus' counsel as we work through this passage very wise, but why would Jesus teach this? I mean, is this wise? Is this compassionate? Won't this just drive them away? No. Think of the whole picture here. How did Jesus relate to tax collectors and pagans and sinners? Jesus ate and drank with publicans, with tax collectors. He reached out to them. He loved them. He appealed to them. But they knew, and he knew, that they were not home, that they were still away from God. So treating someone as outside the church does not mean that we stop loving them. No, to the contrary. And also, treating them as outside of the church can actually help our relationship with them in this way. It takes some pressure off them. We as a church can now stop trying to hold them accountable to live as ones who are in the church, ones who are committed to obey God. Instead, we sort of start at the beginning again with them, giving them God's unconditional love and acceptance like we would the pagan and the tax collector. Jesus ends talking, this is verse 18, about whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And verse 20, where two or three gather in my name, there am I with them. To bind is to say that someone is not forgiven. That sin is still linked to them. They have been confronted, but they have not repented. And in that case, we cannot see the Lord eternally, because heaven is a place where there is no sin. And if we are holding on to our sin, we cannot see the Lord. And then the metaphor to loose is to say that sin has been loosed from them. They are forgiven. They are free of it. It is not who they are anymore in God's grace. And verse 20, about where two or three gather my name, I'm with them, is saying that as we go through this process, God is there as we bind or as we loose someone. God backs up our action in heaven. Sometimes we have used verse 20 as sort of an excuse for poorly attended prayer meetings. But that promise that when 2 or 3 gather, God is there with them. That's when 2 or 3 gather in love to encourage one another so that no one may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Jesus is saying, that's where I am. When that kind of conversation is going on, I am there in the midst of them. If you want to feel Christ's presence, that is one of the situations in which you feel it stronger than any other.